thank you so very much. Jay has been a dear friend a long, long time. I told Jay, please just don't let Cruz stand as an impediment. And I'm glad to see Jay carry through with those instructions. You know, this past week was a momentous week. Hello. Hello. Hey, Mike. Hello, hello.
As they said in the 2000 campaign, help is on the way.
Just keep it on.
So when the mic wasn't working, I told all sorts of embarrassing secrets about Jay Nordlinger. And I trust all of you got them in full, lurid details. This past week has been a momentous week. President Obama was sworn in to a second term. I guess what made the news is Beyonce apparently lip-synced throughout the inaugural. Not as widely reported was the fact that President Obama did as well. Who knew that his teleprompter could play music? We saw this week an ode to liberalism. Unabashed, unapologetic. I have to say, sitting there, it occurred to me, somewhere the seas must be stopping rising right now. And it is easy for us as conservatives to look at the November election, to look at that exultant, unabashed embrace of the left, and to have a moment's despair. Let me say, this room is critical to preventing that to happen. National Review has a long, long history of standing athwart history and yelling, halt. We can stop this. We can turn it around. And in fact, I am right now incredibly optimistic that together, as they say, it is always darkest before the dawn, that we are on the verge of a rebirth of conservatism. So what do we do? How do we make that happen? Let me talk at two different levels, short-term and long-term. Short-term, let's talk about tactics on the ground. In Washington, D.C., we have a president who's feeling his oats. He's reading his press releases and he believes he is unstoppable. We have a Democratic Senate that are feeling their oats. They've read the Kool-Aid. Let me give 3 bits of advice. And by the way, read the Kool-Aid would be just mangling. They're reading their press releases, drinking the Kool-Aid. If they read the Kool-Aid, it doesn't work nearly as well. Let me give 3 concrete bits of advice to conservatives in Washington. And in particular, let me address this to our friends in the House of Representatives, who I think for the next 2 years are the last bastion standing between us and oblivion. The first thing I would urge to every Republican in the House of Representatives is stop reading the New York Times. Cancel your subscription. Listen, the media is going to tell you, I'll sum it up, the next 2 years' headlines from the New York Times. The Democrats are right. Abandon conservative principles and abandon hope, all ye who enter. Their answer, and it will be their prescription on every single fight. Here is what conservatives and Republicans need to do. Abandon your principles and become Democrats. Listen, the very same American people that on November 6th, 2012 went in and re-elected Barack Obama also re-elected a majority to the House of Representatives, and they have every bit as much mandate from the American people that the president has. Number two, in the short term, what can we do? We can stop bad things. And stopping bad things is significant because they got a whole lot of bad things that they want to have happen. The ideas, listen to that speech on the inaugural day, whether it is coming after our guns, which, oh boy, they seem excited to do. Whether it is exploding spending and debt and taxes even more. Whether it is cap and trade, regulating our economy and raising the cost for every American. They are feeling emboldened right now. And if conservatives stand together, we can stop that. And stopping bad things that would harm this country, that would harm Americans, is a major victory for the next 2 years. But the third thing we can do in the short term is we can use leverage points to make real progress on the fiscal and economic crisis threatening this country. The fundamental dynamic when you have divided government is that whichever side owns the default is in the stronger position. Either party can stop anything. So whoever wins, if nothing gets done, wins the negotiation, wins the battle. It's why on the fiscal cliff we got such a lousy deal. Because if nothing happened, the result was a massive tax increase on every American who pays taxes. And I think President Obama was perfectly fine. He was serene to go off that cliff. Why? Because his substantive agenda, which he doesn't hide from, is to dramatically expand the size and power of government, and to do that, he needs to raise taxes. Two major points are coming up: the continuing resolution and the debt ceiling. Both of those are coming up in the next couple of months. Those are leverage points that are the mirror image of the fiscal cliff. Those are leverage points that if nothing passes, the result is not a default on the debt. That's scaremongering from the president. The result is a temporary partial government shutdown. And we've seen that movie before, in 1995, when Republicans stood together, and the result was some political pain, to be sure. But it was also year after year of balanced budgets and some of the most fiscally responsible policies from Congress we have seen in modern times. The only hope of getting anything affirmative done is going to come from those leverage points. Because President Obama has indicated, sadly, he has no interest in being Bill Clinton. He has no interest in tacking to the middle. He has no interest in compromising with anybody. And the only way we're going to restrain the out-of-control spending and debt that's threatening our future is to use those leverage points to force real solutions. So that's the short term. What about the long term? What about strategically? Or Saturday Night Live would put it, what about strategery? In the long term, our objective is simple, and this is where the men and the women in this room are so utterly critical. Why did we lose in November 2012? We lost because we didn't win the argument. Margaret Thatcher famously said, first you win the argument, then you win the vote. We didn't win the argument. What do we do long term? We've got to win the argument. And I'm going to suggest two words that every Republican in this country should have tattooed on their forearm to read on any speech. Growth and opportunity. Let's talk about them one at a time. Growth. There was a time when Republicans were unabashedly the party of growth. We need to return to that. You know, since World War II, our economy has grown an average of 3.3%. Under Barack Obama in the last 4 years, it grew 1.5%. Less than half the historic average. If we don't get growth back, none of these problems get fixed. If we can get back to historic averages of growth, 3, 4, 5%, every one of these challenges we're talking about is transformed. The 23 million people who are struggling to find jobs, the only way they get jobs is growth. The train wreck that is our federal balance sheet, the only way it gets fixed is if there's growth. If we see 4% growth, which is very close to the historic average over the last 200 years, 4% growth in a decade will produce 10 million new jobs. 4% growth in a decade will produce $3 trillion in additional tax revenue to pay down deficits and the debt. By the way, that is more than Barack Obama hopes to get through his massive tax increases. There's more revenue through growth than there ever could be through tax increases, which is one of the ways, by the way, when I'm debating those on the left, and they say they're for revenue. I inevitably agree. I agree. I'm for revenue too. The best way to have revenue, I sit down with those in the business sector, and I say, I'd love to double your taxes. They look at me and think, did I come to the wrong meeting? And I say, I'd love for next year your profits to double and you would happily write twice as big a tax check. You want to pay down our debt, get the economy roaring, get people back to work. 4% growth for a decade, 3 million people would rise out of poverty and be standing on their own feet. We need to be unapologetically, relentlessly the party of growth, and the policies of the Obama administration not only don't produce growth, they kill jobs. We need to get back to growth. And number two, we need to get back to opportunity. You know, if you could sum up what went wrong last election, I think it comes down to 2 words: 47%. Now, by that, I don't mean that ill-fated comment. I think Mitt Romney is a good man. He worked very, very hard. He is a decent man of character. Anyone can have a slip of the tongue. What I mean by 47% is the narrative of the last election. The narrative of the last election was that the 47% who are dependent on government, we don't have to worry about you. That is the entire idea of the Democrats. It buys into the premise that the economic pie is fixed, that it's static, that it never changes. And you know what? If they're right about that, then suddenly redistribution makes a whole lot more sense. If the pie's never changing, why should some have dramatically more than others? The reason they're so incredibly wrong is, as conservatives, we understand this is a dynamic pie. This is a growing pie. It's where growth connects to opportunity. The reason those 47% are not going to be the same 47% tomorrow. Republicans are and should be the party of the 47%. For over a decade, I have been fighting for something I call opportunity conservatism. Now, what does that mean? That means that every domestic policy we as conservatives think about, talk about, fight about, should be focused like a laser on opportunity, on easing the means of ascent up the economic ladder. That should be the focus of every single policy. We should view it through a Rawlsian lens. How does this impact those at the bottom of the economic ladder? And listen, our policies work. The other sides don't. And yet, painfully, so many Republicans don't seem to understand that. Let me suggest an experiment to you. The next time you're watching television, you see a Republican politician come on TV, and the topic of race or class comes up. Turn off the volume. Most Republicans think we're wrong. If you look at their body language, Republican politicians will say, but please stop talking about these issues. Can we talk about capital gains? I can talk about capital gains. I have to tell you, every time that happens, I want to put my boot through the television set. I've had to buy a lot of TV sets. Our policies work. Why is it that for 2 centuries, millions of people have come from all over the world to the United States? Because we are a land that allows unlimited opportunity. It allows people with nothing to work to achieve anything. And the policies of the left, there's a fabulous article that ran in National Review, was written by my friend Mario Loyola, called A Tale of Two Cities. Talked about Detroit and Houston. In the 1950s, Detroit was a bigger city, a more prosperous city. Many would have said a better place to live than Houston. I can't imagine why, but there are some that would have said that. And over the next 60 years, the two cities pursued fundamentally different policies. One, a free market policy that encouraged entrepreneurship and small businesses, and the other, a collectivist government control policy. And if you look at the trajectories of those two cities, it is a perfect object lesson for which policies work and which policies don't. Look, if you want to champion opportunity, I'm very happy to go into any school in America, any community in America, and say, if you want to go with the Democrats, they can bring you the success they've had in Detroit. Every single policy we talk about should be framed from the perspective of opportunity, whether it's something like school choice, which I think is the civil rights issue of the next generation. But you know, school choice, what it's fundamentally about is bringing competition to improve public schools and providing hope and opportunity for kids that are trapped and being denied a fair shot at the American dream. Whether it's something like Social Security personal accounts, which as much as Republicans love to put on our green eye shades and talk about solvency, far more important is the ability for those at the bottom of the economic ladder to accumulate resources and assets that they can use to pass on to their kids and grandkids, to buy a home, to start a business, to get an education. Whether it is taxes and regulation. Let me give a perfect example. One of the best slogans that came out of this last campaign was, "You built that." And it was in response to Barack Obama's terrible but revealing comment, "You didn't build that. You didn't build that small business." You know what? That was one of the best moments of the last campaign, but I wish we'd taken a different tack on it. Because that was a slogan that was aimed at the 53%. It was aimed at business owners. It was aimed at people who had already gotten there. I think our message should have been, you can build that. Because what Barack Obama was saying to everyone struggling to climb the economic ladder is, you can't build that. Listen, I don't really care who built the corporate titans and giants of today. One of the biggest lies of politics is the lie that Republicans are the party of big business. Big business loves big government. Big business is very, very happy to get in bed with big government, to hire an army of lobbyists and tax attorneys and to entrench their power. We should be the party of small businesses, of entrepreneurs, of the next person starting a business in his garage that's going to topple those giant corporations. Our policies work and they're right. You know, in the last 4 years, Hispanic unemployment climbed to over 10%. African American unemployment climbed to over 14%. Everyone is talking about the demographics of this last election and how it means Republicans are doomed for all eternity. The policies of the Obama administration have fundamentally failed the communities that are struggling to climb the economic ladder. And yet, how many Republicans said that even once? How many Republicans were willing to go into communities and say, look, if you want to work towards the American dream. Let me talk very briefly about the Hispanic community. Right now, there are a lot of political consultants saying the answer on the Hispanic community is all about immigration. We just need to run and embrace the policies of the Democrats, and that will cure the electoral problem. I'll tell you what our polling has shown. Hispanic voters in Texas, we asked, what's your number one issue? Immigration was at 5%. Jobs in the economy was at 54%. What our polling showed is the reason Hispanics didn't vote for Republicans was because of 47%. It was because they said Republicans are the party of the rich, those that already have theirs, and that ain't me yet. Now, let me give you something that should be very encouraging. There are 2.3 million Hispanic small business owners in this country. That's roughly 1 in 10 households. Hispanic community, we are an incredibly entrepreneurial community, but Republicans have to learn to carry the message that the avenue for climbing the economic ladder has always been the ability to create a business, to go and work and provide for your family. The message of the left is a message of dependency. It's a message of control, and dependency is not bad primarily because of the public fisc. Dependency is bad because of the impact it has on those who become trapped in a cycle of dependency. I challenge you to find any grandmother who says she wants her grandkids to be dependent on government going forward. We are an optimistic people. You know, the same polling we did in Texas found 77% of Hispanics believe their children or grandchildren will have material wealth. We are an optimistic people. It's who we are, and Republicans need to get back to our core principles of growth and opportunity because our ideas work and their ideas don't. I want to close with one final word of encouragement, which is these are dark days, but we've seen dark days before. There are a lot of folks in this room who remember the late 1970s. 1978, 1979, those were dismal times. Double-digit unemployment, 22% interest rates, gas lines, our hostages languishing in Iran for 444 days. Those were dark times. If you were a conservative in 1978, 1979, there was not a lot of reason to be optimistic. If you were a conservative in 1978, 1979, the New York Times was saying, abandon hope, become a liberal. And yet it took Jimmy Carter to give us Ronald Reagan. And I remain convinced the most significant, long-lasting legacy of Barack Obama is going to be a new generation of leaders in the Republican Party standing up and fighting for principle. Look at the leaders who have been here this weekend. Look at Paul Ryan. Look at Scott Walker. Look at Ken Cuccinelli. Look at Tom Cotton. A new generation of leaders who understand conservative principles are right, conservative principles work. I like to refer to this generation as the children of Reagan, because all of us were kids when Reagan was president. And his model of optimistic, positive leadership, bringing people together and understanding that our principles work and create opportunity, and opportunity for those climbing the ladder, is what we're seeing replicating all over this country. I'm convinced we're going to win the argument. And it's going to be the men and women in this room who are on the front lines winning that fight. God bless you.
Well, as I've told you in column after column, my boy can talk. And the reason is that he can think. Completely connected. I'm told by our masters that we have time for about 8 minutes of Q&A. And if you all are going to be shy, I may have a question or two. But if you'd like to ask a question, shoot your hand up really boldly.
I'm happy to answer or dodge anything.
Let me ask you this, Ted. Hi, I'm still going to ask him. Thank you, though. I'll be with you in a sec, quick sec. How do people like you overcome leftward media bias and sort of general cultural bias that is leftward? You have managed to transcend this, but of course you live in Texas. How do we do this generally?
Look, the media will always be a lost cause. It was a lost cause 30 years ago when Ronald Reagan was elected. It's a lost cause today. So you go over their heads. You talk straight to the people. President Reagan did that masterfully. And you know, it's a lot easier now with the internet, with social media, with Facebook, with Twitter. You know, in my race in Texas, it was a $50 million race. There were $35 million in attack ads run against me. Midway through, I turned to Heidi, my wife, and she looked at me and said, "Goodness gracious, I didn't realize you were such a rotten guy." We didn't have the money to respond, so instead we used social media. Instead we used the internet. We put out videos, light, tongue-in-cheek videos. We went straight to the people. People began emailing them to their friends, began talking to their friends, and we went straight to the people. That's what we've got to do a far better job of doing.
Ted was a guerrilla candidate, in part. Well, they're lined up at a mic. Go right ahead.
Hi, thank you very much, Senator Cruz. I'm Tyler O'Neill, a writer with the Washington Free Beacon, and I worked on the Romney campaign. So I'm very familiar with the argument that we're in a similar time to the end of the 70s, and we see the signs of it all the time, especially with the work in green energy and how much that's failing. But it seems that Obama was able to escape where Carter was not and get reelected. And I'm just wondering, what gives you hope seeing Obama win where essentially Carter lost?
It's a great question. Two things. Number one, his policies still don't work, and he's doubling down on them. There's a reason most presidents in a second term have a very challenging second term. They tend to overreach. And President Obama is giving every indication that he is going to overreach and push for really a radically liberal agenda. That isn't going to work, and I think it's going to backfire electorally. But number two, I believe the results of this election is going to further the process of new leaders stepping forward, and we're going to do a better job making the argument. You know, one of the downsides of the sort of proliferation of media outlets, you got Fox News, you got MSNBC, you got CNN, and it's almost like we're living in parallel universes. If, like I suspect most of the people in this room, you watch Fox News predominantly, you thought Romney was going to win with 70%. And you know what? If you watch MSNBC, well, God help you if you watch MSNBC, but A consequence of that, I don't think we did nearly a good enough job communicating to those who are not already in the choir. Communicating, let's take young people. Young people voted overwhelmingly for Barack Obama. Now that's typical. Young people respond to inspiration. Reagan did tremendously well with young people, but we didn't carry the message. Look, if you're a young person coming out of school, why would you be voting for a president and a party that, number one, has done so much damage to the economy that you can't find a job? And their answer to you is, well, live with your parents till you're 26 and at least you can be on their health care. And that number two is every year adding over $1 trillion to the debt. Look, young people, it ain't complicated who's getting stuck with that bill. Your parents and grandparents have taken out a credit card in your name and they're maxing it up and going to Vegas. Rather than just talking to ourselves, we've got to make that message and carry it to people who haven't heard it yet and win the argument, and I think we're going to do that.
I have a question that goes to the very far future, and by that I mean maybe 10 or 20 years. We're facing a future with artificial intelligence, robotics, and automation that says there won't be a lot of jobs in the future for people. So we need to think about new economic systems to deal with productivity growth and employment loss. So I hope the Republican Party will lead in this, because if not, the future is going to be dismal.
I appreciate that question. You know, I will say I've just been elected to serve in Congress, so I deal with artificial intelligence a lot. There are no doubt there are massive technological changes, and those changes are producing dislocations. And what we've seen in the United States, we've seen shifts in the United States from an agrarian to an industrial society, from an industrial society to an information age. We'll see those shifts occur, and they're always difficult. The answer at each stage has been twofold. Number one, education, and number two, free markets and individual initiatives. If you look at the statist organizations, they do lousy. Government control does lousy on transitions because it changes the rules. And so, look, if we had a collective government control of our economy a century ago, we would have had massive subsidies for horse and buggy makers, because all of these horses and buggies were going out of business by this infernal automobile thingamajigger. The way we get around it is if we remain an environment where someone can start a business, where someone can innovate and create a new opportunity to put people to work. And that's going to continue to happen unless we allow what government control does. A lot of people think socialism really bad for the rich. I actually don't think that's true. Go to Europe, visit a socialist country. The rich do just fine. If you happen to be fortunate enough to be born to the landed aristocracy, you can drive your Bentley, you can have a nice little sculpted garden. You live a very, very good life. What you don't see is any new rich people. What you don't see is the social mobility. You don't see a Bill Gates starting a company in his garage and building it into one of the most powerful companies in the world. That is how we overcome these challenges and transitions. And what I think is most dangerous about what's happening is as the power and spending and control of government calcifies, and as big corporations are complicit in this, it makes it harder and harder for the next innovators to start. And that is what is threatening, I think, the future of all of us. We need to fight to stop that.
Go right ahead.
My name is Richard Wall. I'm an attorney and a newspaper columnist from Wyoming. Many of the people here today attended the March for Life yesterday. We're acutely aware of the fact that 55 million people, Americans, are not here today. They're not paying into Social Security. They're not adding to the productivity of the economy. Could you, first of all, please speak to the policy implications of that as recognized by the Republican Party? And secondly, what are the prospects within the Republican Party for moving from an income tax to a consumption tax in the future because of its effects on growth? Thank you.
Excuse me, Ted, as Bill Buckley might say, I'm going to give you 1 minute and 27 seconds on that.
All right, two very good questions. Let me address them both in the 1 minute and 22 seconds that remain. On life, you're absolutely right. 55 million souls have lost their life to abortion. We don't know how many scientists, how many doctors, how many artists, musicians, athletes, how many great business people who might have started a business to deal with this transformation have been lost. And that is tragic, and I salute you for being at the March for Life, and in particular in one of the coldest days of the year, being out there standing for life. And I think we need to remain a party that celebrates every human life as a precious gift from God that should be protected from conception until natural death.
Ted, I'll give you a grand total of a minute on this final one. Would you like to see the United States a world power, the preeminent world power, or would you like to come home and be a sweet little republic if we can have that?
Gee, I got 60 seconds for that. Somewhere in between is the truth of it. We have been, at least since World War II, the preeminent voice for freedom, the preeminent voice for peace on the globe. That, I think, we must remain. We must remain unapologetically a voice for freedom and peace. You know, if you think about moments in history and diplomatic moments, okay, we've got two pending nominations, John Kerry, Chuck Hagel, both of whom are very prominently
anti-us.
Less than ardent fans of the U.S. military. You know, ironically, the greatest diplomat, the person who, you just wrote a book on the Nobel Peace Prize, the person who in the last century should have won a Nobel Peace Prize more than every winner put together.
You can all say it in chorus.
Was Ronald Reagan. Why? Because he won the Cold War, which had people hiding under their desks at fear of nuclear annihilation. He won the Cold War without firing a shot. And he did so by understanding, number one, that the collective wisdom in the 1970s, that the Soviet Union was unbeatable, that their economy was unstoppable. And I will make, as an aside, you now see some Democrats, some on the left, who say, we won the Cold War. And you kind of have to laugh and say, who's we exactly? There's a great poster, Useful Idiots, that just quotes what all of them said about the Cold War in the 1970s, that it was foolish to even try and stand up. And as a result of our economic strength built on the free market system, we built up a military to protect our national defense, and the Soviet Union crumbled. And it crumbled in part because Reagan had the clarity of vision to overcome the nattering nabobs at state and to utter the most important words uttered by a president in modern times when he stood in front of the Brandenburg Gate and he said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. I think the United States should always remain an unflinching beacon of freedom, but I don't think the answer is for us to be the world's policeman and solve every problem across the globe and send our military to produce democratic utopias in every far away land. I think my view of the military and foreign policy is exactly that of Reagan's, that it should be driven by the national security interests of the United States, that we should go in with clear, defined objectives, overwhelming force, and then, when we're done, get the heck out.
Ted, thanks for coming here. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas.
Thank you, and God bless you.